Okay, hi YouTube, Mr. User Boss here. In this video I'm going to be showing you all of the handheld consoles that I own. So this video is requested by Adash Ashok, and if any of you guys have any suggestions, just put them in the comments below, and if I like them, then I'll do that video and give you a shout out. So I've compiled gameplay footage from each of the consoles, and I've put them in chronological order, so hopefully you'll be able to see the progression that has been made as it happens. And in this video I sort of want to answer the question, what is next gen? Right now next gen is what we see as the future, but it's really hard to believe, but at some point that will be retro. Just like this Game Boy Colour is right now. When we saw this was the future. This thing was absolutely incredible. The fact that this was actually a full games console that you could take on the go was just, it was unheard of at the time. It has a colour display. That was totally revolutionary. The Game Boy Colour caused absolute havoc in the market. It sold ridiculously well worldwide because, it was an incredible machine. This thing was as powerful as it got in handheld devices. And, the graphics it produced were just fantastic for the time. So the gameplay you're seeing here is from Pokemon Red, and that was by far my favourite game on the Game Boy Colour. And hopefully you can tell by the level of my Pokemon, I sunk a fair few hours into this game and enjoyed every last bit of it. So now we jump to the Game Boy Advance. Now this was a vast leap forward in terms of processing power, screen technology and controls. So first of all, you may notice we've got L and R buttons. Now this was again something totally new at the time, and it allowed us to do so many new things. The GBA screen was a huge leap forward. It could display 512 colours simultaneously, compared to the Game Boy Colour, which could only display 52 shades of one. The Game Boy Advance also had a 16.78 MHz processor, which seems absolutely puny right now, but back then it was enough to, make people really get excited about this thing. One of the best things about both of the Game Boy Colour and the Game Boy Advance, which is soon to be ditched, was that they used AA batteries. It's kind of strange because I switched on my Game Boy Colour for the first time in 2 years today, and it was still working. I didn't need to charge it, I didn't need to do anything. And those AA batteries, while I suppose they end up costing a bit more than charging it yourself, they really do last. Another of the incredible features of the Game Boy Advance was the ability to do multiplayer games. Now this was done by an incredibly awesome cable, as you can see, or if you're really lucky, you could actually get the limited edition wireless connection. Now this was really high tech at the time, and I was just blown away when I saw it working. So one step above the Game Boy Advance came the Game Boy Advance SP. Now this is more of a revised model of the Game Boy Advance, but it brought us closer to where we are today for two main reasons. Firstly was the form factor. This was the first time Nintendo had actually done a clam-shaped form factor, and this is the one they seem to have stuck with for most of their consoles. On top of that, this is where they actually first introduced the backlit display, and this was really, really awesome. I remember I used to actually use a light, a special lamp that I had attached to my Game Boy Advance just so I could see it when it was dark, because frankly it was unusable otherwise. And this, this was a real godsend. So in 2004, Nintendo wowed us all. This was their first ever venture into the dual screen sort of realm, and no one had ever done it before. But once people saw it in action with games like Mario Kart, there was no questioning how innovative the idea was and how much it added to the gaming experience and the immersion. The Nintendo DS was, no doubt it was revolutionary. Never before had anyone seen a console quite like this. It had stereo speakers, it had a beautiful, rich, sharp display. It had a touchscreen on it. This had never been done before either. Touchscreen on a, dedicated console, that was pretty much unheard of. And this was one of the first touchscreens available to consumers worldwide. And it was games like Mario Kart and, Dr. Kawashima's Brain Training that really got a large majority of people who weren't previously into gaming. And the 3DS was really, really powerful. It was probably the most powerful mainstream portable device when it was released. And this allowed it to create, for the first time really, 3D graphics on a portable console. And they looked absolutely fantastic. And as you can see, Mario Kart here, this looks really good. Even today it looks pretty decent, and that was the launch title, so imagine the reaction back then. So then came the PlayStation Portable, and this is by far the console I've played the most on altogether. This thing had so many awesome games, I just didn't have enough time for them. I mean, just to name a few, there was Ratchet and Clank, there was God of War, there was Patapon, there was Loco Roco, there was Monster Hunter. It was just vast, and I enjoyed every last bit of it. The PSP was a bit of a weird console because it actually used UMD, so it's the first ever handheld console to use like a disc-based medium, and this meant a few things. Firstly, as you can probably tell, really long load times, longer than any other system. Secondly, there's this constant whirring sound as the game's discs need to actually be read by the console. Seriously though, like quirks aside, the PSP was the must-have media device of that generation. I mean, this screen, this 4.3-inch screen was absolutely luscious. I mean, it was the sharpest screen, it was the ultimate media device. It had stereo speakers, this thing had buttons which are really nice even today. When it launched, the PSP was so far ahead of the competition in terms of specs. I mean, people were just drooling, literally. I mean, imagine seeing God of War running on the first time on a handheld when, the most graphically impressive game you'd seen before that was like Mario Kart or Pokemon. And next up is the 3DS. So, this is really something quite special because, I mean, if you compare this to original DS, it's way better. Some of the actual improvements include stereo speakers instead of mono speakers, 3D display versus 2D display, better buttons, bigger displays, ridiculously more powerful, front camera, rear dual cameras, joystick, and the list goes on. So I mean, to sum up, the 3DS is a really big step forward. It offers new, enhanced gameplay capabilities, it's a lot more powerful than the PlayStation Portable, and it's just totally unique. I mean, it's a totally fresh take on everything. I mean, although it is still a two-screen clamshell design like the original DS, the DSi, and all the other sort of DS-ish sort of consoles that Nintendo's had, this time they really have taken it a step further. The 3D adds a lot to the immersion, and is definitely more than just a gimmick in my opinion. On top of that, the games are actually much richer than they were, 10 years ago. And they seem to offer a lot more depth. I mean, a lot of games, back in the day, they were created just, for a bus ride or that kind of thing. Just when you had a bit of time to kill. Whereas now, games are almost like a lifestyle. So I suppose games have gotten deeper, they've gotten stronger storylines. And the more powerful consoles gives the artists more, room to express themselves. So, we can really get immersed in these experiences and feel like we are the characters in the games. And then came the PlayStation Vita. Now, I mean, as you probably already know, I love this thing to bits. It's everything I wanted in a sort of next generation handheld, and it's, it's powerful, it's got a great, beautiful OLED display which even matches today's smartphones. Maybe not on the resolution front, but it's still crisp enough, but, the color reproduction is just still beautiful. On top of that, it's really powerful, and as you can see, I mean, playing Killzone Mercenary, you can't even tell it's not a home console. I mean, this thing produces graphics that would have got a standing ovation on home consoles a few years ago. Okay, yes, I'll admit, the Vita does have some flaws. I mean, it's got lots of gimmicky features, things like gyroscope, accelerometer, the back touch panel. They've not really been used to their full extent, and to be honest, I still think that Sony would be better off ditching it in their next model just to keep the cost down. On top of that, bringing up costs, it's the memory cards. They're still ridiculously highly priced, and they have no reason to be proprietary. It makes no sense, and I'm sure Sony could have done without. Having said that, I mean, I would have happily paid twice the price of the Vita to get what this thing is, and I just think not enough people know about it and what it does for it to reach mass appeal. Now, the last one on my list is a little bit of a different one, and this is the Nvidia Shield. So as you all may know, I'm a really big fan of this thing, and it's not a typical handheld console like the others, in that, it's an open platform. So generally speaking, there have been some exceptions for this, but generally speaking, developers do not make games specifically for the Nvidia Shield, but they will optimize their game so that it runs with it, and is compatible with the controller. But I mean, Shield does a lot more than just play Android games. Firstly, it plays Android games very well. I mean, it's got still probably the most powerful internals of any, Android device today. And, it can run pretty much everything super smooth. On top of that, it's got Game Stream. Now, Game Stream means that if you've got a GTX-based PC, you can stream your PC games and play them anywhere in the world, providing you have Wi-Fi. Then we have emulators. This thing can emulate every single console up to the current generation of handheld consoles. and you know, it runs them flawlessly, and in some cases even upscales them to the native resolution so they look even better than they originally did. So that's a massive plus for this, and you know, it's not something that any other console can say they do. Also, being an Android device, the Nvidia Shield has full access to the Google Play Store, so I mean that alone just gives it so many possibilities. I mean, there's so much you can do with the Nvidia Shield that you just cannot do with other closed platforms. So that's it from me, guys. I really hope you enjoyed this video, and I'd love to hear what your opinions are on your favourite handheld consoles. Thanks for watching, guys. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more.